The night she finally walked away, she forgot to take her shoes. At 12:47 in the morning, Savannah Brooks opened the apartment door and stepped into the cool Manhattan rain with nothing but an old camera and a small canvas bag. The city looked different after midnight. Traffic lights reflected across the wet pavement like pools of gold, and the distant sound of a siren faded between the tall buildings. She stood on the front steps for several seconds, breathing hard, waiting for someone inside herself to tell her to turn around. Nobody did. Her sweater was already damp, and cold rain clung to her curls as she slowly walked down to the sidewalk. The old camera rested against her chest. She had not touched it in 3 years. Once, she had carried it everywhere. She used to wake before sunrise to photograph the city. She used to believe she would become a photographer someday. Then life happened quietly, one compromise at a time. Extra shifts, unpaid bills, promises to chase her dreams later. Later became next year, and next year became never. She stopped beneath a streetlight and looked down at the camera in her hands. It felt strange holding it again, like finding an old friend she had forgotten existed. Behind her, the apartment door suddenly opened. Savannah. She closed her eyes. Jason Miller stood in the doorway wearing a dark sweatshirt and jeans, his expression more confused than worried. "What are you doing out here?" She did not answer. He walked down the steps and stopped beside her. It is almost 1 in the morning. Rain taps softly against parked cars. You are standing outside without shoes. She looked at the street instead of at him. "I know." He noticed the canvas bag and the camera. "You are not seriously leaving." The words were meant to sound amused, but there was uncertainty in them. She finally looked at him. "Maybe I am." He shook his head gently. "Come on. You always need a little time when you are upset." A sad smile touched her face. "Doi." He nodded. "You walk outside, you cry for a while, and then you come back upstairs." The words settled heavily inside her because they were true. She had always come back. She had always convinced herself that tomorrow would be different. Jason took another step closer. "Whatever happened tonight, we can talk about it in the morning." Savannah looked down at the old camera. "I do not think tonight is about one thing that happened." He frowned. "Then what is it about?" She swallowed hard. "I think I forgot who I was." The sentence surprised even her. Rain slid down her cheeks, and she no longer knew whether it was rain at all. Jason stared at her, unable to answer. Across the street, a black luxury car slowed at the red light. Instead of driving on, it stopped, and for reasons she could not explain, Savannah suddenly felt as though someone inside that car had noticed her standing alone in the rain. The black car remained at the red light, even after the signal changed. A horn sounded somewhere behind it, then another. Inside the car, a man in a charcoal overcoat looked through the rain-covered window at the woman standing barefoot beneath the streetlight. She held an old camera against her chest, as though it were the last thing in the world that belonged to her. There was something about the way she stood that made him pause. She looked tired, not from one difficult evening, but from carrying too many difficult years. "Pull over," he said quietly. The driver nodded and guided the car toward the curb. On the sidewalk, Jason rubbed his hands together and looked at Savannah with growing concern. "You are cold. Come back upstairs." She shook her head. "I cannot." "Why?" The question sounded almost desperate. She looked toward the dark street instead of at him. "Because if I go back tonight, I think I will stay the same person forever." The answer left him speechless. Rainwater slid from her curls and landed on the old camera. She gently wiped it away with her sleeve. "I do not even remember the last picture I took," she whispered. "I do not remember the last thing I did simply because it made me happy." Jason stared at her, as though he were seeing someone entirely different. "You never told me you felt this way." A sad smile touched her lips. "I do not think I knew how to explain it." Across the street, a car door opened. The sound was soft, but somehow it seemed to quiet the entire block. Savannah lifted her eyes. A tall man stepped out of the black car and closed the door behind him. He wore a dark overcoat over a white shirt, and a faint black tattoo disappeared beneath the collar near his neck. He did not hurry. He simply crossed the wet street with calm, measured steps. Jason frowned. "Can I help you?" The stranger stopped several feet away and looked directly at Savannah, leaving enough space between them that she did not feel threatened. Then he asked, in a voice so calm it almost sounded familiar, "When was the last time you did something only for yourself?" The question seemed impossible. Savannah, search her memory. Work schedules, grocery lists, rent payments, long shifts, endless promises that things would become easier someday. She could not find the answer. Jason gave an awkward laugh. "I think you have the wrong people." The man did not look away from Savannah. "I do not think so." The rain softened until it became a mist drifting through the streetlights. A taxi passed at the end of the block. Somewhere above them, an apartment window closed. The city seemed to disappear around them. Savannah looked down at the old camera in her hands. Her fingers tightened around it. Then she whispered the truth she had not admitted even to herself. "I do not remember." Her voice broke on the last word. The stranger remained perfectly still. There was no surprise in his expression, only understanding. And for the first time that night, Savannah felt as though someone had finally noticed how tired she really was. The stranger's calm expression never changed. He simply stood in the rain and waited, as though he understood that some answers needed time. Savannah lowered her eyes to the old camera in her hands. It suddenly felt heavier than before. "I used to carry this everywhere," she said softly. Neither man interrupted her. "I would wake up before sunrise and walk through the city, taking pictures of anything I thought was beautiful." A faint smile appeared on her face. Coffee shops, street musicians, pigeons in the park, sunlight on old buildings. She paused. "Everything." Jason looked at the camera with surprise. "I remember when you bought that." She nodded. "I saved for 6 months." The memory made her smile for only a moment before it disappeared. "I thought it was going to change my life." The stranger glanced at the camera and then back at her. "Perhaps it still can." She almost laughed at the idea. "I have not touched it in 3 years." "Why?" he asked gently. The question should have been simple, but she found herself searching for an answer. Work, bills, long hours, exhaustion. None of those things seemed big enough by themselves. "I do not know," she finally admitted. "I think I just kept telling myself there would be time later." The stranger lowered his eyes briefly, as though he knew exactly what she meant. "Later is a dangerous word." She looked at him. "Why?" A faint sadness crossed his face. "Because people spend their whole lives waiting for it." The answer settled heavily in the cool night air. Even Jason remained quiet. The stranger looked toward the glowing windows of the apartment building. One day becomes 1 month. 1 month becomes 1 year. Then he looked back at her, and suddenly the things that made us feel alive become memories. Savannah felt her throat tighten. Nobody had ever described her life so perfectly. She looked down at the camera again. "I miss the person I used to be." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. The stranger nodded slowly. "Then perhaps she is not gone." She looked up. "What if she is?" He took a small step closer, careful not to invade her space. People do not disappear all at once. They simply become quiet. Rainwater dripped from the branches of a nearby tree. A taxi moved through the intersection and disappeared into the darkness. The entire city seemed to pause around them. "And sometimes," he continued softly, "all it takes is one night to remember who we were." A tear slipped down Savannah's cheek. Jason looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was not anger or frustration. It was regret. "I did not know you missed all of this so much," he said quietly. She looked at him with tired eyes. "I do not think I'll let anyone know." The stranger reached into his coat pocket and handed her a clean handkerchief. She accepted it with a small smile. "Thank you." He nodded once. Then, for the first time, he introduced himself. "My name is Lucas Kong." The name sounded strangely familiar. Before Savannah could ask another question, a pair of headlights appeared at the end of the street and slowly began moving toward them. The headlights grew brighter as 2 black SUVs slowly approached the curb behind Lucas's car. They stopped quietly, their engines humming in the stillness of the rainy night. One of the doors opened and a man in a dark suit stepped out. Another followed, both remaining beside the vehicles without saying a word. They simply waited. Jason looked from the SUVs to Lucas and frowned. "Who are you?" Lucas slipped his hands into the pockets of his coat. "I already told you. My name is Lucas Kong." The name seemed to settle over the street like a sudden change in the weather. Savannah's eyes widened slightly. She knew that name. Everyone at the Grand Crescent Hotel knew that name. Several weeks earlier, managers had spent days preparing for a special guest. Security had increased. Flowers had been replaced. Entire floors had been inspected twice. One of her coworkers had whispered, "Lucas Kong is coming," one of the most powerful investors in the city. Savannah looked at the man standing in front of her and suddenly understood why he carried himself with such quiet confidence. "You're Lucas Kong," she said softly. He turned toward her. "You know my name?" She nodded slowly. "I work at the Grand Crescent Hotel." A faint smile touched his face. "Then perhaps our paths crossed without us realizing it." Jason looked confused for only a second before recognition finally appeared on his face. He glanced at the black SUVs and then back at Lucas. The color seemed to drain from his expression. "Wait," he said quietly. "You are that Lucas Kong?" Lucas did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked towards Savannah and then at the old camera in her hands. "Tonight is not about me." The rain had almost completely stopped. Tiny drops still clung to the leaves above them, sparkling under the streetlight. The city felt strangely peaceful. Jason folded his arms. "Then why are you here?" Lucas looked at Savannah again before answering. "Because I saw someone standing in the rain holding an old dream like it was the only thing she had left." The words made her lower her eyes. Nobody had ever described the moment so perfectly. She tightened her fingers around the camera strap. Lucas continued, his voice calm and steady. "People do not walk into the middle of the night carrying old memories unless something inside them is asking to be heard." Silence followed. Even Jason had nothing to say. A bakery on the corner suddenly turned on its lights, and warm yellow light spilled onto the empty sidewalk. Morning was slowly approaching. Lucas looked back at Savannah. "You do not need to decide your entire future tonight." She lifted her eyes. "I do not." He shook his head gently. "No, you only need to decide whether the woman holding that camera deserves one more chance to become herself again." Savannah looked down at the old camera. For the first time in years, it no longer felt like a forgotten object. It felt like a door that had quietly opened, and for the first time in a very long while, she wanted to step through it. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The city seemed to hold its breath with them. Savannah stared at the camera in her hands while Lucas's words echoed in her mind. One more chance to become herself again. It sounded beautiful and terrifying at the same time. She looked up at him. "What if I do not remember how?" Lucas's expression softened. "Most people do not." She gave a nervous laugh. "That is not very encouraging." A faint smile appeared on his face. "No, but it is honest." Rainwater dripped from the edge of the building behind them. One of the men near the SUVs quietly handed another man an umbrella, but neither approached. They seemed to understand that this moment belonged only to the three people beneath the streetlight. Savannah looked down at the camera again. "I used to think I would travel everywhere with this thing." She gently brushed her fingers over its worn edges. "I wanted to photograph cities and oceans and old buildings." She smiled sadly. "I even had a notebook filled with places I wanted to visit." Jason looked surprised. "I never knew that." She turned toward him. "Because I stopped talking about it." Her voice remained gentle, but the truth inside it felt heavy. "At first, I thought I was just being responsible. Then I got busy. Then I got tired. And eventually I forgot that I had ever wanted anything different." Lucas listened quietly. There was something in her words that seemed familiar to him. He looked toward the glowing windows above the apartment building and then back at her. "I once knew someone who did the same thing." Savannah looked up. "Someone you knew?" He nodded slowly. "She spent her entire life taking care of everyone around her. She always said she would make time for herself later." His voice became softer, but later never came. The street fell silent again. Even the distant sounds of traffic seemed to disappear. "What happened to her?" Savannah asked gently. Lucas looked toward the rain-covered pavement. "She became a stranger to herself." He paused for several seconds, and by the time she realized it, she no longer believed she deserved anything more. Something in his eyes changed for only a moment. It was not sadness exactly. It was memory. Savannah held the camera a little tighter. "I am sorry," she said quietly. He looked back at her and offered a small nod. "That is why I stopped tonight." She frowned slightly. "Because of me?" He shook his head. "Because I recognized that look in your eyes." She did not understand at first. Then she did. He had not stopped because she was standing in the rain. He had stopped because he knew what it looked like when someone slowly disappeared inside their own life. A cool breeze moved down the empty street. Savannah looked at the old camera and then at the sleeping city around her. For the first time in years, she could almost picture herself waking up before sunrise again. She could almost hear the sound of the shutter. She could almost remember the woman she used to be. And for reasons she could not explain, that memory no longer felt impossible. The first hint of dawn was beginning to soften the darkness above the city. The bakery on the corner switched on another row of lights, and the warm glow spilled across the wet sidewalk. Savannah looked up and realized they had been standing there for a long time. Yet for the first time in years, she did not feel the need to rush anywhere. Jason slipped his hands into the pockets of his sweatshirt and looked at Lucas again. "I know your name," he said quietly. Lucas turned toward him. "Most people in this city do." Jason let out a nervous breath. "I did not expect to meet you on my street at 1 in the morning." A faint smile touched Lucas's face. "Neither did I." One of the men standing beside the SUVs approached and handed Lucas a dark umbrella. Lucas accepted it, but did not open it. The rain had almost stopped completely. The man gave a respectful nod and returned to the vehicles. Jason watched the exchange and seemed even more unsettled. He looked back at Savannah. "You know who this is?" She nodded slowly. "I recognized his name." Jason rubbed his face with one hand and stared at the ground for several seconds. Then he looked at Savannah again. "I think I have been listening tonight, but I do not think I have really been hearing you." She did not answer. There was nothing cruel in his words. They simply sounded tired and honest. "You kept saying you forgot who you were," he continued. "And I kept thinking this was just another argument." He looked at the old camera in her hands. "I forgot that there was a person inside all the routines and bills and schedules." Savannah felt her chest tighten. She had not expected this conversation tonight. Jason took a slow breath. "I remember when you bought that camera." A small smile touched his face. "You carried it everywhere." She nodded. "I did. You used to make me stop walking because you wanted pictures of coffee shops and old signs." For the first time that night, she laughed softly. "I remember." He looked at her with sadness. "I think I stopped asking about the things that made you happy." The street became quiet again. Lucas remained completely silent, allowing the moment to belong to them. Jason looked toward the apartment building and then back at her. "I thought loving someone meant working hard and building a future." He swallowed. "Maybe I forgot that it also means paying attention." The words hung gently in the cool air. Savannah looked at him with tears gathering in her eyes. Not because she was angry, because she knew he meant every word. He stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance. "I never wanted you to disappear inside your own life." She nodded slowly. "I know." Another long silence followed. Then Jason looked at Lucas. "You saw it in one night." Lucas looked towards Savannah before answering. "No." His voice was calm. "I simply noticed what had already been there for a long time." Jason lowered his eyes. The truth of it seemed to settle heavily inside him. The sky above the city was beginning to turn from black to dark blue, and somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing. Morning was coming, and all three of them seemed to understand that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The first bird sang somewhere above the buildings, and the sound seemed impossibly gentle after such a long night. Savannah looked toward the brightening sky and then back at Jason. She could see tears gathering in his eyes. Not because he was losing her, but because he was finally seeing her. "I think I understand now," he said quietly. "You are not leaving because you stopped loving me." She swallowed hard. "No." He nodded slowly. "You are leaving because you stopped loving your life." The truth of it made her chest ache. She looked down at the old camera. "I do not even know who I am anymore." Jason stepped a little closer. "I think you do." She looked up at him. He gave her a sad smile. "I think you are just afraid to become her again." A tear slipped down her cheek. For years, she had been afraid to admit that she wanted something more. Afraid to dream. Afraid to disappoint people. afraid to choose herself. And somewhere along the way, fear had become a habit. I am scared, she whispered. Jason nodded. I know. The city was growing brighter by the minute. The bakery doors opened, and the smell of fresh bread drifted into the street. A delivery truck moved slowly through the intersection. Morning was beginning. I always thought we had time, Jason said. Softly. Time to travel. Time to rest. Time to be happy. He looked at her with tired eyes. I kept saying later. Savannah let out a shaky breath. Me too. He laughed quietly, though there was sadness in it. We built a whole life around a day that never came. The words settled between them like a final truth. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jason looked at the old camera in her hands. Do you know what I remember most? She shook her head. A faint smile appeared on his face. The way you looked when you took pictures. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? He looked toward the slowly brightening sky. You smiled differently. Tears filled her eyes again. I did. He nodded. You looked like someone who had discovered a secret. The words broke something open inside her. She remembered it. The excitement. The wonder. The feeling that every ordinary moment could become beautiful if she looked at it the right way. She had forgotten that person for so long. Jason took a deep breath. I do not think I have seen that smile in years. Silence returned. Then he looked at her with a kindness she had not expected tonight. Maybe it is time you find it again. Savannah stared at him. You mean that? He nodded. Edo. He looked toward the apartment building and then back at her. I love you enough to admit that I cannot ask you to stay if staying means losing yourself. Tears rolled down her cheeks. The words were painful and beautiful at the same time. She stepped forward and gently touched his hand. Thank you. He smiled sadly. I think this is goodbye for now. She could barely speak. I think so too. He nodded once and looked at the camera. Then go take beautiful pictures again, Savannah. The city became completely still. Even Lucas lowered his eyes for a moment, as though honoring the quiet courage of two people choosing honesty over comfort. For a long moment, nobody moved. The city around them seemed softer now, as if even the rain had decided to let the night in gently. Savannah still held Jason's hand, and she could feel that they were no longer standing at the end of an argument. They were standing at the end of a chapter. Jason gave her fingers a light squeeze before stepping back. I think you should go somewhere warm, he said with a small smile. She looked down at her bare feet and laughed softly through her tears. That sounds like good advice. He smiled too. It was the first genuine smile she had seen on his face all night. Then he looked toward Lucas. Take care of her. Lucas met his eyes and nodded once. I will make sure she is safe. There was something reassuring about the way he said it. Not dramatic. Not possessive, simply certain. Jason looked back at Savannah. I hope one day I get to see one of your photographs hanging in a gallery somewhere. Fresh tears filled her eyes. That might be asking a lot. He shook his head. No, I think I have spent years asking too little from your dreams. The word stayed with her. Then, without another sentence, he turned and slowly walked back toward the apartment building. He paused at the entrance and looked over his shoulder one last time. She raised her hand slightly. He smiled and disappeared inside. The door closed softly behind him. The street became quiet again. Savannah stood there for several seconds, staring at the building where she had spent so many years. She expected to feel empty. Instead, she felt strangely light, as if she had set something down that she had been carrying for a very long time. Beside her, Lucas opened the umbrella and held it over her head. You look cold. She laughed softly. I think I'm finally noticing it. One of the men from the SUVs approached and quietly handed Lucas a folded coat. Lucas placed it over Savannah's shoulders. The warmth surprised her. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded. There is a small hotel nearby. She looked at him. A hotel. A place to rest for the night, he said gently. Tomorrow can make its own decisions. She looked toward the brightening sky. I do not even know what tomorrow looks like anymore. A faint smile appeared on his face. That can be a gift. She turned toward him. You really believe that? He looked at the old camera in her hands. I think the best photographs happen when people stop trying to control everything they are about to see. She smiled. at the comparison. Then she looked at the camera again. For the first time in years, she did not see a forgotten dream. She saw possibility. Lucas opened the rear door of the black car. "One safe night," he said quietly. "That is all you need right now." Savannah looked at the waiting car, then at the sleeping city around her. The air smelled of rain and fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. Somewhere above the buildings, the first pale colors of dawn were beginning to appear. She took a slow breath. Then she stepped forward, carrying nothing but a small canvas bag, an old camera, and a fragile hope that perhaps the woman she used to be had been waiting for this night all along. The car moved quietly through the sleeping city. Savannah sat beside the window with the old camera resting in her lap and watched the streets of Manhattan pass by. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the sidewalks shining beneath the streetlights. A bakery opened its doors for the morning rush. A man walked his dog across an empty intersection. Somewhere in the distance, the sky had begun to turn from dark blue to soft gray. Dawn was coming. She looked down at the camera and gently ran her fingers across its worn edges. It no longer felt like a reminder of something she had lost. It felt like an invitation. Across from her, Lucas sat in silence, allowing the quiet to settle around them. Finally, she looked up. "Thank you for stopping tonight." He met her eyes. "You do not need to thank me." She smiled softly. "I think I do." He looked out the window for a moment. Everyone deserves one night when someone notices they are not all right. The words stayed with her. A few minutes later, the car stopped beneath the entrance of a small luxury hotel. Warm golden light spilled onto the sidewalk, and flower boxes lined the windows. One of the men stepped forward and opened the door. Savannah remained seated for a second longer. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked quietly. Lucas looked at her and then at the camera in her hands. "Tomorrow you sleep a little longer than usual." She laughed softly, and after that, a faint smile appeared on his face. "Perhaps you walk through the city with my camera?" He nodded. "With your camera." She smiled and stepped out of the car. The morning air felt cool and clean. She stood beneath the hotel lights, wearing his coat over her shoulders and holding the old camera against her chest. Lucas joined her on the sidewalk. The city was waking up around them. "I used to think I needed my whole future planned before I could start over," she admitted. He looked toward the horizon where the first pale colors of sunrise were beginning to appear. "Most people think that." She turned toward him. "And what do you think?" He smiled slightly. "I think new beginnings usually arrive before people are ready for them." She looked at the sky and let out a slow breath. Then she lifted the camera and pressed the power button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the small screen flickered to life. She laughed in surprise. "It still works." The sound of her laughter seemed brighter than the sunrise itself. Lucas looked at her and smiled. "I never doubted it." She raised the camera and pointed it toward the eastern sky. Golden light was beginning to spill between the buildings, touching the windows and turning the wet streets into ribbons of gold. Click! The shutter sounded softly in the morning air. It was the first photograph she had taken in 3 years. She lowered the camera and looked at the image on the screen. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from something she had almost forgotten: hope. Behind her, the black car quietly pulled away from the curb. She looked up and saw Lucas standing beside the open door. "Will I see you again?" she asked. He looked at the sunrise and then back at her. Cities are full of unexpected meetings. A small smile appeared on her face. He gave a respectful nod and stepped into the car. A few seconds later, it disappeared down the street. Savannah remained beneath the hotel lights, holding her camera and watching the sun rise over Manhattan. Somewhere between the rain and the dawn, she had found something she thought was gone forever. She had found herself,